Hello there, bienvenidos. Regardless of whether you're looking for Spanish lessons for beginners or you're more advanced in your study, this video has something for you. Today we're talking about Debí Tirar Más Fotos. In this series, specifically made for the needs of students of Spanish, we're going to be translating the lyrics of Bad Bunny songs and breaking them down to explain interesting vocabulary and grammatical concepts. Each time I introduce a word or a grammar point, I'm also going to provide their estimated level on the Common European Framework of Reference based on my personal experience with the Spanish language and Instituto Cervantes' curriculum plan. I know many of you won't be entirely sure what I'm talking about, what is this framework of reference, so I've also made this video to guide you through it and help you understand why it's used and how it can help you, so that you know which concepts it's best to focus on now and which concepts you can put on the shelf to learn later. Just a few quick disclaimers. These videos are going to be focusing on the language aspect of the songs. Culture is also very crucial to Bad Bunny's music, but unfortunately it's outside of the scope for these videos, and I'm sure that members of the community can provide better analyses on culture than me. Also, the purposes of these videos are educational. They alter the original material significantly, so I do believe this should fall under the fair usage clause. However, I don't know what YouTube does exactly to automatically detect the usage of copyrighted content, so I'm only going to use as much material as review these concepts. Okay? Okay. Here we go. Otro bonito que veo someone disfrutando de toda esa cosa que extraño lo que se van. I'm going to assume you're familiar with what makes Caribbean Spanish sound the way it does, so I'm not going to cover the sound changes in detail, but some of the things you may have already noticed are just how many English borrowings Puerto Rican Spanish uses. Now, Caribbean Spanish is also known for dropping S sounds at the end of syllables, dropping D sounds in between vowels, pronouncing R at the end of the syllable as L, and pronouncing N's at the end of the syllable further back in the mouth. So, los que se van becomes lo que se van. The first word we're going to discuss is extrañar, which you should have learned very early in your language learning journey. It's the Latin American way of saying that you miss something or someone. Very commonly, when the thing that you are missing is a person or even something that you have a very strong emotional connection to, you're going to use the a personal before the thing that you're missing. So, extraño a mis padres, extraño a mi país. I miss my parents, I miss my country. And because the people in this sentence, los que se van, don't have this a personal in front of them, you can guess that they are the subject, they are the ones who are doing the missing. You can see that Spanish generally allows a more flexible word order compared to English. Next up is the reflexive verb irse. It's a verb that emphasizes departure or separation, so it's a very common and very useful verb. You should know how to conjugate reflexive verbs. The most literal translation of los que se van is those who move away. However, irse can also be used more metaphorically and a little bit euphemistically to mean to pass away. It's the things that those who move away are missing. It's the things that those who pass away are missing. We're jumping into deeper waters with the verb disfrutar, which means to enjoy something. Normally, the first time that you come across this verb, you learn that you're supposed to say disfrutar algo. The object is put directly after the verb, no preposition. However, you must have surely noticed that here, Benito says disfrutar de. There's a preposition, there is this de And that's because disfrutar algo and disfrutar de algo actually have slightly different meanings. You know, a lot of times they're actually interchangeable, but the way that I can best explain the difference is that disfrutar algo without the preposition means specifically to derive hedonistic enjoyment out of something in the moment. While on the other hand, disfrutar de is used with something that gives you a blissful experience. Something that is pleasurable but not necessarily on the physical level. There are some fixed expressions that are useful to know that always take the preposition. For example, disfrutar de buena salud, to enjoy good health. Being in good health is a blissful experience. It's not an experience from which you derive pure hedonistic joy. Disfrutar de un año sabático, to enjoy a gap year, to enjoy a sabbatical. Similar logic applies here. Disfrutando de noche de esa que ya no se dan. The next word we're talking about is darse, which in one of its usages can mean to happen. Generally, textbooks and Spanish classes emphasize pasar o ocurrir. You know, all three mean exactly the same thing. Darse is just a little bit more colloquial, I would say. You can always default to pasar o ocurrir. They're easier for learners to use, but you should know that darse is also fairly commonly used. You might hear it sometimes. Pero queriendo volver a la última vez que los ojos te miré. Next, it's volver, which means to return to something, and you should memorize that the preposition that this verb takes is a. A lot of Spanish verbs take certain prepositions that you just have to memorize. Also, something that you learn fairly early, but I've heard even intermediate speakers mess up, is in Spanish, there are multiple words that translate to time in English. If we're talking about time with the meaning of an occasion, the word to use is vez, not tiempo. La última vez, the last time, or more directly translated, on the last occasion. Well, in English we might say that we're looking in people's eyes. In Spanish, you look into the direction of people's eyes. Mirarte a los ojos, not mirarte en los ojos. Y contarte la cosa que no te conté. ¿Te parece mi crutch? Haha. Generally, when you use infinitives that go along with pronouns like contarte, tirarte, you put the pronoun directly after the infinitive. But you can also put the pronoun before the verb that is conjugated. So, quiero contarte and quiero tirarte mean exactly the same thing as te quiero contar, te quiero tirar. Y tirarte la foto que no te tiré. Hacho jurado, te ves bien linda. Déjame tirarte una foto. This usage probably comes from the time where you still had to pull the film out from the camera to get your photo. Tirar fotos, literally to pull photos, is another way to say to take photos that is maybe a little less common and more dialectual compared to the ones that you probably know, like sacar fotos, tomar fotos. Hey there, it's me from the future, here to fill in some detail that I originally forgot to mention. If your focus is on Peninsular Spanish, the most common expression you're going to hear in Spain is hacer fotos, and you can also occasionally hear echar fotos everywhere, but echar used with fotos is considered very colloquial and informal. Hacho is a very common colloquial Puerto Rican exclamation that is used kind of in a similar way to like in English when you say, Dude! Tengo el pecho pelado, me dio una mata. El corazón dándome pata. Dime, baby, ¿dónde tú estás? In standard Spanish, matada, coming from the verb matar, means killing. However, in colloquial Central American and Caribbean Spanish, it can also be used to mean a strong hit, una caída o un golpe violento. Similarly, patada means a kick, even though in some South American countries it can also mean an electrical shock. Although in English we might say to hit somebody or to kick somebody, in Spanish you literally say to give somebody a hit, to give somebody a kick, to give somebody a punch. El corazón dándome patadas is a very beautiful metaphorical expression to mean that the heart is palpitating. It literally means the heart is giving me kicks. Pelado generally means bald, without hair, but it can also be used slightly metaphorically to mean bare or exposed, as in this case, tengo el pecho pelado, my chest is exposed, meaning my emotions are exposed. Pa llegarle con Roro, Julito Cristal, Big J tocando bata, hoy la calle la dejamos desbaratar. Desbaratado, desbaratada is a colloquial adjective used throughout the Caribbean to say that somebody is exhausted or left in shambles, and in particular in Puerto Rico, very often the initial the sound is dropped, so you get esbaratado, esbaratada. Y sería cabrón que tú me toques el güiro. Yo veo tu nombre y me sale el suspiro. The bata and the güiro are Latin American percussion instruments. In Spanish, to say that you're playing an instrument, you say you're touching an instrument. Tocar. However, Benito here is using tocar el güiro as a double entendre. He is asking you to literally touch his güiro. Yeah. So, cabrón literally means male goat, but colloquially it's used differently. It can either be used as an insult or to say that somebody or something is awesome. Usually, context helps differentiate between the two. And here, because sería cabrón is an impersonal statement that expresses emotion, it has to be followed by the subjunctive. It would be so awesome if you could play with my güiro. Yeah. You know, the second sentence is not a real happening, it's only imaginary, only in my head. That's why it takes the subjunctive. No sé si son pétalos, si son tiro. Mi blanquita perico, mi quiero. Yo estoy en PR tranquilo. Pero this next point is something that you learn early on that you're going to continue messing up as long as you remember. It's estar versus ser. Generally, estar is used with temporary and permanent states. For example, a location. Debí tirar más fotos de cuando te tuve. Debí darte más besos y abrazo las veces que pude. In Spanish classes, when textbooks and teachers cover the past tenses, the preterite and the imperfect, there's a list of verbs that are commonly given as examples of verbs that change their meaning depending on which past tense you use them in. The four verbs that are generally covered as changing their meaning are saber, conocer, poder, and querer. And also no poder, no querer. In particular, poder in the preterite implies the achievement of some result. So that's why it's commonly translated as manage or can manage. The kisses and hugs were in fact given. He just wished that he gave more of them. Poder in the imperfect, podía, implies ability and possibility but doesn't focus on the result of the action. However, besides these four common verbs, there's another one that teachers often forget to introduce, and that is deber. Deber in the imperfect, debía, expresses a habitual obligation, had to. So if Bad Bunny had said, Debí Tirar Más Fotos, that would have meant I was obliged to take more photos. However, he doesn't use debía, he uses debí, which can be translated as should have. Actually, the meaning of regret of debí comes from the expression debí haber hecho algo. It can be followed by the past infinitive, but for simplicity's sake, it generally isn't. That's why it means I wanted to, but I didn't. Ojalá que lo mío nunca se muden, y si hoy me emborracho, pues que me ayuden. Next up, ojalá, which may or may not be followed by que, but is always followed by the subjunctive. Ojalá comes from Arabic and literally has the same root as inshallah. That's why it triggers the subjunctive, and that's why it's the only trigger for the subjunctive that doesn't require que. Los míos can have many meanings: my family, my people, or my crew. Getting drunk, emborracharse, is a reflexive construction because really you're doing it to yourself. Que me ayuden here is a bare subjunctive construction, a use of the subjunctive that doesn't take any triggers. The bare subjunctive is used to give commands, especially in persons that don't have an imperative form. So this whole sentence means, if I get drunk, let them help me. In English, it's translated as let. Let me, let them, let's, etc. Hoy voy a estar con mi abuelo todo el día jugando dominó. Si me preguntas si yo pienso en ti, yo le digo que no. Using ir a plus the infinitive is just one of the ways to express the future tense, like in English when you say going to. This is something that you're just gonna have to memorize, but when you use pensar in the meaning of I am thinking of somebody, the preposition that you have to use is en. So I'm thinking of you is pienso en ti. A way to visualize this is to think that ti is kind of like the enclosure in which my thoughts are roaming around. That's why it's en, inside. Que metodía cerquita de ti se terminó. Ya se terminó. Hey. Estadia is just the noun form of the verb estar, means a stay. Hey, que prende la máquina, voy pa' Santurce. Aquí todavía se da caña, checate la baby, diablo, mami, que dulce. When talking about turning on appliances, encender is the most common word and is the word that you're probably going to learn first, but prender is another synonym that basically has the same meaning. Benito is giving a command to turn on the máquinas. However, máquina here doesn't mean machine. Throughout the Caribbean and in Venezuela, máquina also means a vehicle, a car, although generally it's considered colloquial. It's a synonym of carro, coche, auto. Next up, darse caña is a colloquial expression that means to get revved up, to accelerate, to get the party going. It's lit! Caña generally means rod or cane, like sugar cane, but also in the past it was used to refer to a rod on boats that could be drawn to accelerate the vessel. I don't know what that thing is called in English. I'm not familiar with nautical terminology, but that's where dar caña comes from. Oh, yo quiero beber, 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 y hablar mierda hasta que me pulsen. This is very basic Spanish. Querer can mean love or want, and when you use querer with the infinitive, it's you want to do that infinitive. Quiero beber, I want to drink. Hasta que is another one of these triggers for the subjunctive that you should know about, because what follows hasta que is something in the future, something that we're imagining that hasn't actually happened. That's why the subjunctive is required here. Estoy bien loco, estoy bien loco. Cabrón, y tú que estás caminando, yo estoy que choco. A word that you might frequently hear throughout Latin America, even in dialects that don't drop their S sounds, is tar. It's conjugated like yo estoy, nosotros estamos, ustedes están. It's just a truncated version of the verb estar, dropping the S syllable wherever you can. It's very colloquial, you're gonna hear it a lot. Here we're using estar loco and not ser loco, because loco here is a temporary state. You're going wild for a bit and then at some point you're gonna calm down. If you say ser loco, that means that somebody is a crazy person, and that's an inalienable characteristic of them. Hasta is a very confusing word. Besides meaning until and triggering the subjunctive, it has another usage. It can basically be used as a synonym of aún o incluso. Estoy bien loco, estoy bien loco. Vamos a disfrutar que nunca se sabe si nos queda poco. Debí tirar más. In Spanish, if we want to use an impersonal construction that generalizes, the way to do this is to take a totally ordinary verb, turn it reflexive, and use it in the third person. Nunca se sabe. It's kind of like one never knows. Quedarse means for somebody to have something remaining, something left. However, what's a little bit confusing is that compared to English, in Spanish we reverse who does the action and who suffers from the action. So here in Si nos queda poco, queda agrees with poco. It's kind of like very little time remains with us. It's not that we have very little time remaining. That's the logic behind the Spanish construction.
Gente, lo quiero con cojones, lo amo. Gracias por estar aquí, de verdad. Para mí es bien importante que estén aquí. Cada uno de ustedes significa mucho para mí.
Another major struggle for Spanish students is the two prepositions por y para that are both translated as for. One of the proposed etymologies of para is that it used to be the two prepositions por a, and then the o changed to a and became para. So if you think about it spatially, por is kind of where something comes from, and para is kind of like a destination. Gracias por estar aquí. You're already here, and so after the fact, I am thanking you. Significa mucho para mí. Significa mucho, something meaning a lot, something having value, comes first, and then para mí, I am the recipient of this. I am the person benefiting from this. So I am the destination. That's why we have para. You know, this isn't the most correct explanation. It doesn't completely apply to all cases, but I think it's useful when we're learning these cases to visualize the cases that take por as where something comes from and para as where something is going. Impersonal constructions that express value or are just generalizations always trigger the subjunctive. Es importante que always triggers the subjunctive. It's kind of like when you say it's important that you're here. You can be here, but you may not yet be here. This second clause is not necessarily real. That's why it takes the subjunctive. Cada is something we encounter very early on our journeys. It means each, every. One confusions that students sometimes have is that they think of cada as an adjective that can change its endings, and so they say cado, which it's not a word, it's always cada, regardless of whether the noun afterwards is masculine or feminine. It's always cada. Cada uno means each and every one. Everyone is just todo el mundo. You say the whole world.
Así que vamos para el foto, vengan para acá, métese todo el mundo, todo el corillo, vamos.
Todo el corillo is a very colloquial synonym of todo el mundo, kind of. It literally means the whole gang here, the whole squad. Ya Debí tiene nene y a la nena. Ya no estamos para mover la cadena. Estamos para las cosas que valgan la pena. Nene y nena, colloquial ways of referring to babies. Next up, the construction estar para. It means to be ready to do something, or especially when used in the negative, to be willing to do something. In Latin America, estar por can be used with the same meaning, while in Spanish, estar por means something slightly different. Lastly, let's figure out why this sentence uses the subjunctive, because it doesn't appear there to be a triggering expression around. The answer is adjective clauses. Clauses that replace adjectives. Adjective clauses take the subjunctive whenever what they're modifying is generalized and isn't something specific, isn't something that exists in front of you. Las cosas que valgan la pena. We aren't talking about something specific. These things aren't something we already agreed on. We're saying whatever these things may be. That's why we say valgan and not valen in this situation. Pa'l perreo, la salsa, la bomba y la plena. Chequéate que mía como que suena. Basically, at the end of the song, the chorus just repeats, but there are two lines that are slightly different. Y que tú me manudes, y si llueve borracho, que no me ayude. So yeah, this was my in-depth language analysis of Bad Bunny's lyrics. Let me know in the comments if anything was unclear, if there's anything that I didn't talk about that you're still confused about. I'm doing this so you can benefit from this, so let me know if there's anything I can change to make this experience better. If you haven't done so yet, please like and subscribe. It only takes a second and it helps my channel. I have released lots of other videos on language learning. I've released travel vlogs, so check them out if you're interested. And yeah, I will see you all next time. Good luck, buena suerte.